Have you ever felt like your desire to change yourself or a circumstance ends up devolving into a sense of hopelessness or frustration because past circumstances and events are just getting in your way? Then that makes two of us. In today's video, I wanted to go over a couple of psychology principles that I've used in my life, and more importantly, I wanted to give personal examples on how I applied them into my life and what it looks like to use them to overcome this hurdle. So the psychology I wanted to talk today was the idea that there's this dichotomy, that on one side we have that all events are bound and created by the past events. So A equals B, B goes to C. Or reversely, C is happening because of B and because of A. And so that's on this side of the dichotomy. And on this side, we have the ideal that the past doesn't matter. And the reason why you're getting that something is because that's what you want to be getting in the moment. This ideal is called teleology, which is described really well in the book, The Courage to be Disliked. And so that ideal is that your current desires and goals are the reason why you're getting your outcome. Now, like as I said, these are a dichotomy that are on both of the extreme spectrum. So that means neither of these sides get the full story. And like all dichotomies, that's supposed to be transcended to a higher understanding. But there's a lot that you can mine from these sides. So I wanted to give some personal example on how I have used this. So to give a little backstory, a very abbreviated backstory of myself, when I was a child, I had a severe head injury in the front of my brain that caused a lot of bleeding, and I almost died. And so I had a couple years of recovery there in which they were over-medicating me. So I got the head injury when I was 20 months, and then this went on until I started going into elementary school. So there was a lot of delay in my social development and other developments and stuff because of that. So I had that. And then I guess I'll share in this video that I also lived in a bit of a gray area that other people who also have a parent that had a diagnosed mental health condition might be able to understand, where it's diagnosed and it's being treated, so there's not really any big capital T trauma happening anymore, but it's also very not normal or typical, which gives this interesting thing. So you can't really, so when you're talking to somebody who has capital T trauma, you don't know what really to say to them because your examples just pale in comparison. But then when you talk to people who had more typical upbringings, you don't really connect with them, or it just seems so ordinary. It's just like you're in this weird gray area where you can't quite fit into either groups. So with that, especially when I became a teenager, I started developing a lot of anxiety, especially when it came around to talking with people. The nature of my development problems also in school made it a breeding ground for me to become a people pleaser, because I came in, my beginning school years, I was told I was slow or I might need to be held back in everything. So it became a goal for me to really outshine and disprove teachers' opinions of me. So I developed a lot of people pleasing habits on that, so people pleasing teachers, keeping my mom happy, things like that. And that anxiety just continued to grow. So even as a teenager, I tried to address this by doing things like, say, handing out flyers for my church, going door to door, because people always said, if you have social anxiety, all you have to do, right, is to talk to people more and it'll go away. So I tried doing that. And then when I graduated high school, I even went to Bible college and put myself in a room where I had to share one room and one bathroom with 5 other girls, because I was like, that'll surely cure me of it, right? That didn't work. And as I just developed through my 20s and into my 30s, I just kept getting, this anxiety just kept getting worse and worse, where every interaction with a person I'd have, I'd consume my thoughts for hours and hours. And it really was crippling to my life and not a lot of fun for my husband to deal with. So that was my thing. So there's my A to B to C story. So it makes sense that I was anxious because the things that happened in my life helped me develop as a people pleaser. So if I can't please people, that'd create the anxiety, right? Because especially after I transitioned to adulthood, like I no longer had a report card. Now I had to deal with adults. And the problem with being a people pleaser with an adult is adults don't know what's going to please them. So how are you supposed to figure that out? So with the trauma work, that was actually, in the past work, A, B, and C, especially going backwards, C came from B to A, was very beneficial to me because it helped me root out the narratives. Because even if I wasn't consciously thinking about these stories, they were controlling my thoughts. So using that side of the dichotomy to find the narrative, to find the story, was very important first step for me. But it didn't cure my anxiety. And in a lot of ways, when I tried to deal with it or be like, okay, I know this and I'm going to go for, it even made it worse because it increased the feeling of hopelessness or frustration that I had these events in my life. And that's where the other side of the dichotomy comes in, where you can ask that question of, what am I getting out of my anxiety? So the result is my anxiety, and I'm not going to consider the background or anything of it. Then you get to ask the question, why am I deciding to be anxious? Why am I creating this feeling of anxiousness? And so this process takes a really long time because you have to sit with these questions for a very long time to see what comes out of them. And so for me, what do I get out of the anxiety is I'm trying to control the situation. So I'm getting it because by being anxious, I'm super aware. I'm super focused on other people. I'm trying to people please them. I'm trying to manage their emotions, figure out what they're doing because I want to please them. So that's what my anxiety is doing. It's giving me a hyper awareness to be able to people please. So then the question is, so why do you want to people please? And, there's an obvious answer there that, I want people to like me. But then the question is, why do I want people to like me? And the answer there is because if people like me, they are not going to be confrontational with me or confront me. And then that would allow for me to be able to do my own thing on the side without being questioned. So that led to the question, why do I have such a hard time being questioned about my ideals or the things that I want to do? And that is where it kind of, on this trail, kind of took me by surprise because I found I didn't want to be questioned because the actual answer there was I didn't want to be understood. And so that's kind of different, right? I mean, if you're people pleasing, you want people to like you. You would think you would want to be understood. But I found for myself, I didn't want to be understood. And so when I asked, continuing on there, why do I not want to be understood? And I don't want to be understood because that would mean I'm understandable. And the more I sat with that, I was realizing if I'm understandable, that means I'm not unique. That makes what I'm doing mundane or ordinary. And that actually caused, a fear response. Like, then if I'm ordinary and if I'm mundane, then what's the purpose? And that was a really big thing for me to realize because then I actually had a root thing here. I don't want to be seen as mundane or ordinary. And so that allowed me to be able to say, well, then what is the worst case that's going to happen? Why don't you want to? What would happen if you actually allowed yourself just to appreciate and be able to sit in the mundane and ordinary? And that developed a lot of breakthroughs for me because the more I'm being able to just sit and just not worry about having to like stand out or be different, the more it allowed me to become present and actually to be able to find joy and happiness and comfort in the present moment, free of my anxiety. So when I go and I talk to a person, I don't have to be worried about trying to control their way, if they like me or don't like me. I don't have to be worrying about trying to manage their emotions or their response to me. I can actually be in the moment and have a conversation with them. And when you're in a moment and you're just appreciating and having a conversation with a person, you'd be surprised at how little anxiety there is. So there you have it. There's just a personal example of mine on how I used the ideal that your past dictates what you're having now, and how you can use teleology that you can be, change right now and not have to consider about the past things if you actually ask yourself the right questions. So I hope that was helpful to kind of see an example of the thought process that happens when you're actually using it, because I would have liked to have one, because going through those steps and asking those questions and kind of finding those things, it's a very uncomfortable thing. You sit there and you look at yourself and it doesn't feel pleasant. And so it's very hard sometimes to be able to push through to actually get true and lasting personal growth that you can integrate into yourself. When you're hitting things that make you feel icky and then you think you're going in the wrong direction and you back off. And that makes it where we can fall into that spiral that I was talking about in the beginning. So you want to change, but then you have to sit and figure out what to do with this thing. And then it's so easy to spiral into hopelessness or frustration and then start taking it out into the outside world. So just hope that gives you encouragement to be able to sit and ask yourself the right questions, even when the answers are tough. Just so that you know that there is light on the end of the tunnel and that there are solutions to these things if you're willing to take the time to ask the right questions, sit with it, and do the work to integrate into a more whole person. So I hope that helped, and I hope to see you in another video.